Today I will make this brief presentation on Professor Valerie Higgins that we have the pleasure to meet today and tomorrow for these two lessons concerning two fundamental topics that are the authenticity and the visitor experience and the migrant communities and how to incorporate them into the heritage narratives. She started with research at the University of Sheffield, where she got a PhD on the human remains of an Italian monastic context, and she also got a master's degree in economic archaeology. And she also got an honor degree given by the University of Liverpool on ancient and medieval history and archaeology. Out of the university, she also worked as a professional archaeologist for local government, and she does research in the United States, New Zealand, and of course here in Italy, where she teaches and does research on Italian archaeology and on the complex situation of cultural heritage in Rome, where she is currently based, and indeed she became the project director of the master degree in sustainable cultural heritage at the American University in Rome. Her recent research, like we will see probably, are focused on the contemporary cultural context of European cities and all the historic and political issues that are influencing the archaeological practice. And she strongly working on making archaeology accessible to a broad audience, also using the impact of digital media and teaching to different groups of people like adults or high school groups and so on, and also participating to popular TV programs on archaeology and cultural heritage, like her participation to the TV series The Story of God by National Geographic. And so I let her start with the conference.
Thank you very much. Right, well, good morning everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's my very great pleasure to come and talk to you today and to talk to you about something that I think we need to really think about carefully. Because it's not just a word, it is something that actually is at the basis of everything we do. Authenticity. By authenticity, well, perhaps I could start by asking you, is somebody brave enough to tell me what they think? When I just say the word authenticity, or something is authentic, what do you think I'm telling you? Any brave souls who are going to volunteer?
What is authenticity?
I don't want you to give me a professional or scientific definition. I want you to tell me what you think, just if someone says it to you.
Something that has artificial aura around it, that we made superficially.
Something that has
aura
around it. Okay, that's good. So that's something that's got a special value to it. Why does it have a special value to it? What do you think?
Because it's from a specific era or time history,
okay.
And it's not a copy.
Not a copy. What's the opposite of something authentic? Don't say non-authentic. Give me another word for something that you think might be the opposite.
Fake.
Fake. Well done. Right. So in our minds we have something that's either the real thing or it's fake. And that real thing has a special aura or value for us because that's what it is. Okay, if you think about it, that if you're dealing with heritage in the public sphere, that actually is the fundamental principle of it all in a way. The public have to believe that what you're telling them is the real thing. Otherwise you have no value, right? You're not, there's no point in it. If in some way it isn't real, doesn't have, you know, they have to believe in you. You have to have their faith. And this has become even more important now, I would say, than if I were to be giving this lecture 5 years ago. Because in the last few years, I think we've become ever more sensitized to the fact that we can't always believe everything that we see to be right and correct. And maybe that was always the case. I don't know, maybe we've just got our eyes open to it now. But nevertheless, we have to address it. And we have to position ourselves in a certain way. We have to create for ourselves identities and definitions that everybody believes in. Otherwise, we're finished. we are not going to survive. We're not going to be credible professionals if we don't. Now, the reason why that is challenging is that today's audience is not the same audience as you would have had in the past. Maybe even 5 or 6 years ago, the audience would be different. Definitely 10 years ago or more, you would have a very different audience. So we have to understand their changing perceptions and changing requirements, shall we say. And we have to be sure about where we stand in relation to that. So what I want to talk about specifically is authenticity and the visitor experience. So that is not authenticity in the sort of historical scientific sense of do you have documents, do you have testimony, etc. It's about the public's perception of what is real and truthful, and about how we deal with that and how we address it. Now, to begin this, I'm going to go back to look at the foundations of our own belief in authenticity and the principles upon which we base authenticity in relation to cultural heritage. And we have to begin in the 19th century, really, with this, when people first began to address this issue. Prior to that, there wasn't actually a great deal of interest in it. If you go back to the Renaissance, back to the Baroque period, people copied statues and made imitations, and by and large, they weren't terribly interested in whether they were fake or whether it was the original. In fact, many people preferred the fakes because you could make them nice and complete without arms missing and bits chopped out of them and no noses and things. You could actually have a nice statue that was complete. So they were not overly concerned about authenticity in that period. But when we get into the 19th century, people begin to really think about it. And they equate authenticity with truth and with strong moral, ethical values. So it is something that is ethically important. It's often almost taken in a religious way, that you've got to give something that is the truth. And we have two towering figures in the 19th century who have dominated the argument on authenticity ever since. And when I come to the end of this presentation, you will see that we're going to come right back full circle, and we will have exactly the same arguments today as these two people had in the 19th century. And they are very much in competition competition with each other for the public mind. The first one I'm sure you've heard of is John Ruskin. John Ruskin was a British art critic. I think it's important just to say a few words about his background, because that actually was very influential. Because we, I think, are very much used to thinking of him as someone who is a very traditional, old-fashioned type of British thinker. But actually, in his day, he was very revolutionary. He is by no means the establishment. We think of him as such, but he was not. He actually came from a modest background. But his father became very wealthy. So he did not come from a traditional old family. His family were families of shopkeepers. And he probably would have become a lawyer, except that his grandfather was a terrible shopkeeper and sent the family into bankruptcy. So the father had no option but to become a merchant, which was considered to be quite a kind of lower class thing to do at that time. If they'd had a little bit more money, he would have been a lawyer, something that was considered to have more status. But merchants made more money. So he went into that. And he went into becoming a merchant of wine. And that was actually extremely important because it meant that he travelled around continental Europe the whole time to buy wine. So his father travelled for most of the year, and from a young age he took with him his son John. So John had a very good knowledge of the whole of Europe, or at least that part that provides wine, which most of his contemporaries did not. They had not travelled as he had. Ruskin absolutely despised the aristocracy. The aristocracy who had most of the art, he despised them. He thought they were ignorant, he thought they were immoral, that they didn't, know how to put in a good day's work, like good middle-class people should. He was extremely influential in starting the National Trust. He was one of the first people who started the National Trust, which is still, I believe, the largest landowner in Britain, and is a cultural heritage organisation which is not part of the government, but it is by far the biggest. It is absolutely massive. I forget exactly how much of the whole territory of Britain it owns, but it is, quite substantial. The only other landowner who is close to that is the Queen. But when we look at the National Trust now, which is an organisation which largely looks after stately homes and castles and homes of the elite, that was not how it started. It actually started to save precious countryside for working class people from the industrial areas, and to save vernacular architecture. So the first things it bought were actually farmhouses and things like that. Its association with castles and stately homes comes long after the death of Ruskin, and it comes about as a result of the damage of the 2 world wars. It was because they were so damaged after the war that there were no landowners couldn't pay for it, and after the First World War, many estates didn't have any heirs. A whole generation of young men had been wiped out. So that is very much later. So the original association of his work is in public work. It is in saving it for working class people and in expanding it for working class people. And whilst, if you look at his official biography in Wikipedia or something, they will doubtless tell you, first of all, that he was Slade Professor of Art at Oxford University. If you read down, he will also tell you that at exactly the same time, he was a lecturer at the Workers' Educational Alliance, which were a series of colleges for working class people held in the evening after they're done their 12 hours down the mine or in the factory. They went to these classes, and in fact his great popularity was through the people. It was not through the elite. He despised the elite. He thought they were pretty worthless people.
Just one thing, for us, John Ruskin is also a very significant person, because he came quite often to Italy, and especially to Venice. He was a friend of Pietro Selvatico, which is, let's say, in northern Italy. Pietro Selvatico comes from Padova, and he studied mostly small arts, like it was at that time, arts and craft and so on. And when Ruskin arrived to Venice, he went to live at the house of Pietro Selvatico. And it was Ruskin and Pietro Selvatico. The problem is who influenced whom. That's what we are discussing now, in the idea of the restoring and how to restore ancient things. But also Pietro Selvatico was very linked to people. He never wrote, maybe he's not so famous in literature like John Ruskin, because he also denied a bit this high elite culture. He wanted to work for people, and he wrote 2 books about Padova, which are tourist guides, practically, about the old heritage of the city. So it's very interesting. And then with Pietro Selvatico, who follows my courses in the triennial, knows that we think medieval archaeology starts with these people, because they started studying medieval heritage and developing, let's say, archaeology of buildings at that time.
No, that's right. I didn't know he had a connection with Padova. That's very interesting. And in fact, there is his work, this is John Ruskin's work, on Venice, which is the city he is most connected with in people's minds. The city that probably had the greatest influence on him. And what I've included here is some of his notebooks. You can see that he was actually a very good artist in his own right, in fact. And he was a very good friend of Turner's, and in fact was the executor of Turner's will. Turner trusted him so much that he made him his executor. So that means he controlled his work afterwards. And he went around Venice and he did these very careful measured drawings of Venice, which people had not done before then. It was remarkable, really, but there were kind of nice, watercolours and oil paintings, but the actual precise drawings of the buildings as they were was not something that had been done. And it was this study of them that led to his principal concepts that underlay his work. And actually, let me just go back to the previous slide. He felt that there was a moral imperative to conserve monuments in their original form, and he did not agree with restoration or even with cleaning too much. He said that if you clean the building too much, you lose what he called the golden stain of time. Now that word stain, macchia, is something that we use today as a kind of pejorative word, as a negative word. But he was saying this is not a negative word. This is the history of the building in that. And if we you can see from Napoli, Turkey, how it was, and then after this kind of really rather horrible restoration, which takes out all of its character and history. He was appalled at this kind of thing, that you would wipe out the history of the building. He was something of a purist. He actually did believe that you should not keep restoring buildings, that buildings were destined to decay and be got rid of, kind of thing. They go at a certain point. Once we get into the 20th century, even people who are enthusiastic followers of Ruskin, if you're actually in charge of the building, well, you can't really let it go away to nothing. You have to conserve it and restore it. So pretty much nobody followed him in his purest form, but nevertheless this idea of a minimum intervention is very much his concept. And if I just go back here, he also brings in something which is incredibly important to us today in the way we think of things. He said, we may live without architecture and worship without her, but we cannot remember without her. Now, the role of heritage as part of memory, and therefore identity, is something that is absolutely of crucial importance to us today. In fact, the intersection between heritage and identity politics is absolutely at the heart of everything we do, and I'm going to come on to that tomorrow in the lecture I give tomorrow. Ruskin actually says this. He's like a century before his time in saying this. Nobody thought of that before. But he says it. So, who is Ruskin's opponent, should we say? Ruskin's opponent is a man called Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who had a very different approach to heritage. He was what is called an interventionist. He certainly did not believe in minimal intervention, quite the opposite. He said he wanted to re-establish the building in a finished state, which may in fact never have existed. So he thought that there was a license to use this as a kind of creative project, that you could let your imagination go with it. And this is one of his more flamboyant ones in France. He had a lot of influence in continental Europe, mostly in France, of course, where he came from, but also in Italy. If you go to the baths of Caracalla today in Rome, if you look at the signs that there are, the tabelli that there are there, you'll see that all of the reconstructions are actually Viollet-le-Duc that they use on theirs. They're very beautiful. I mean, really stunning, his work. However...
That's what happened in Padua. I wouldn't say half of the buildings, but most of the most beautiful buildings of the medieval age that you see in Padua are completely invented.
Yeah.
I mean, people remains horrified.
Well, that's right, yeah.
When I said this building was not like this, it has been invented in order to reproduce something they imagine could have existed. I mean, the maybe most representative one is the building that is in front of the cathedral, in front of the Duomo. We have the plans and the images of this building at the end of the 18th century. It was restored in 1920, and there's nothing about what they see before. They knew it was built in the 13th century, in the 14th century, but they just decide to impossible to see today.
Yeah, that's right. That is Viollet-le-Duc, and the important thing I think to understand is that there was a period of time in Europe when Viollet-le-Duc's approach was the norm. It was the common one. It was the one that everybody followed. The most famous example is Carcassonne, and I'm going to come back to Carcassonne later on in this talk. So, beautiful, beautiful. Not quite so beautiful. That's what it looked like before Viollet-le-Duc got his hands on it. And we're going to come back to the story of Carcassonne. So, we have this situation where we have these two real giants, shall we say, of conservation theory, of art theory. Whether you should do the minimum, even perhaps allowing the building to be destroyed in so doing, you know, because that is truth. Or you should use this as a way to let your imagination go on what something could have been. Two opposite approaches. Ruskin was very much in the Anglophone community. His approach was the one that was most admired by the English-speaking world. Viollet-le-Duc was the one that had precedence in Europe. When UNESCO was formed, they had to decide where they were going to go with this. And UNESCO came down firmly and squarely on the side of Ruskin. And that has been the case ever since. That has been, you know, although there have been many changes, you really can say that even today, if you look at UNESCO operating guidelines, you can trace a direct path back to Ruskin. Now, I'm not saying Ruskin in his most pure form, Ruskin unchanged or anything. No, things have changed, but definitely they adopted those principles. And they have had a very big impact on how we see heritage today. And we need to think about them. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong, but they are, we need to be reflective of whether they're still right for us today. So, let's go a little bit into UNESCO and why it decided to go with this definition of authenticity and what this meant. And as I say, we have to bear in mind that in 1945, when UNESCO was formed, it was by no means the most popular approach. It was not, we look now and we think that it's obvious that you would do that. That was not the case at the time. Let's have a look at why they went that. When UNESCO was formed in 1945, the devastation across Europe of historic cities was massive. They had been what we would call today carpet bombed. I think we can't really imagine what it was like. I really urge you to go on, there are some good historical clips on YouTube. Go on and just take a look at some of the flights that were made over major cities and see the absolute devastation. The city is totally in ruins with like one building standing, something like that. And that is how a huge part of Northern Europe and Britain was. Most specifically, there had been this particular bombing campaign between Germany and Britain that was called the Baedeker Raids. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. No, this is something that people in Northern Europe tend to talk about a lot, but it didn't affect Southern Europe, so it tends not to be something that people have heard of There was a period of time when the German forces had taken over all of continental Europe. They were positioned along the coastline, along northern France and the Netherlands and Belgium, and they were clearly amassing forces to prepare for an attack on Britain. In order to demoralise the population of Britain and make this attack easier, the Germans decided to institute what they would call the Baedeker raids. Baedeker was a German guidebook to the art and architecture of Europe, and they gave stars to different places. 3-star was the highest you could be. So they decided to carpet bomb the 3-star cities of Britain, the ones that had the most important historical and artistic buildings. So there was no strategic importance in this in a military sense. It was literally to destroy the culture, to demoralise the people. So Britain decided to retaliate, and they did exactly the same to Germany. So there was this period, you can imagine the devastation was massive, both in Britain and in Germany. This actually is still this is still an ongoing legal situation, which is still something that's very contentious, because Britain decided to bomb Dresden. That was one of the cities that was destroyed in this bombing wave. Absolutely beautiful city, stunningly beautiful city. When they took the decision to bomb it, which was in February 1945, it was already clear at that moment that Germany was going to lose the war and that they would not be attacking Britain. Therefore, this potentially constitutes a war crime, because there really was no reason to do it. And that is still something that is going. And I think there's a very strong possibility that it will end up in the International Court in The Hague, because there really is no doubt it was a retaliation of Hamas. But you can see that in 1945, when you set up UNESCO, the thing you've got to deal with, first of all, is this total destruction of your historic cities. And how are you going to rebuild them? What are you, I mean, this is not at this point a theoretical argument. This is not something that we can all sit around and discuss in a night. You know, it's a real problem that's on your doorstep, and it's got to be dealt with right now.
Valerie, are you going to talk about today also, is it the same problem that we are facing today with destructions of, let's say, ISIS, for example? They are destroying places that have meaning.
Well, that's right. No, I haven't included it.
Okay, but
today,
it's also something we can discuss. Why are
we
they...
can certainly do it tomorrow.
Okay, because you understand what I mean. We are asking ourselves today why ISIS is destroying Petra or whatever.
Yes.
They do it on the same exactly objective, not because they are interested in destroying the Buddhas or whatever. They are interested in mining our own identity and...
Actually, I do mention that.
Okay.
Cultural genocide.
Okay.
We will cover tomorrow. Why you engage in cultural genocide.
Do you care if I interrupt somebody?
No, I like it. We always have, in my institution, we have very interactive classes where people, you know, shout out things and what have you. So I'm quite used to it, don't I? But it's interesting what you say. We had my institution, American University of Rome, last October we held a workshop on building community, empowering communities. And we invited in academics, but also people who actually work on the ground in this. And in particular, we had someone from ECROM. ECROM is the conservation section of UNESCO, which is based in Rome. and we in fact had the woman who runs the first aid project, as it's called. So when there is an earthquake or a flood, she is next day on a plane out to this place to organise the heritage rescue. And in fact, at the time we had this workshop, she had literally come back the day before from Kerala in southern India, where they had terrible floods. And at one point in this discussion that we were having, it was good, it was very robust, I think is what diplomats call this kind of conversation, where people feel that they can just say what they think. And we had this one academic who said, well, the problem is that we have to define community, and we have to know who is local community. And she said, look, if I've got floodwaters up round my legs, I do not have time to sit and ask people if they're a member of this community. You know, sometimes when you have to make decisions, and you know, that's the reality of it, and that is their reality. They do not have time to sit and sort of say, now, are we going to have a conference on what constitutes authenticity and how we're going to do this? So, at this time, in view of what had happened, really everybody felt that truth, historical truth, is what they wanted. They wanted their memories back. They did not want some sort of invention of things. They wanted what had happened to be recorded. They wanted it to be known. They wanted their memory back, their city back, and they were not in a mood for kind of creativity, shall we say. That was not what they wanted. And Warsaw was extraordinary because it was totally flattened, quite deliberately, in fact, to get rid of the Polish people. That was the intention. And the architecture department of the university, knowing that this was likely to happen, had actually smuggled out of the city measured drawings of the whole of the historic centre. And after the war, people quite literally, without anybody telling them to do it, they decided they would rebuild it brick by brick. They literally took the rubble and rebuilt it exactly as it had been before. This was not a kind of decision made by UNESCO or anyone else. It was their decision to do it. Those citizens did it. And that's how they wanted it. Whoops, sorry. And that's what we've got now. This is a reconstruction of the historic square of Warsaw, but this dates from about 1950. This is not original. It was all totally destroyed. Now, so that is really why Ruskin's approach, I think, became the one that was embodied in UNESCO. It was engaged in this massive reconstruction, and Ruskin's approach really fitted the situation a lot better. And that is why it ultimately becomes embodied in the Venice Charter in 1964 for the conservation and restoration of monuments and sites. And this is still a real key point when you're talking about conservation. The 1964 Venice Charter is what everybody refers to, even though we've modified it since. And it states that you need to safeguard buildings no less as works of art than as historical evidence. If they are historical evidence, there really is not a lot of room for the fanciful reconstruction, because it is not historical. No. There should be no new construction. They did not like rebuilding, and they did not like turning it into something else. No new construction, demolition or modification which would alter relations of mass and colour. Ruins must be maintained, i.e. not rebuilt, so they're not ruins anymore. All reconstruction work should be ruled out a priori. No reconstruction, only anastylosis. Right. Now, anastylosis meaning that when you've got the blocks there, you can put them back together. You can see that anastylosis, though, can be interpreted very widely.
That's why archaeology of buildings is extremely important today, because it's the only way of studying a building by stratigraphy to understand all the different periods that have passed through a building. And that's why repainting buildings, as we do very often today, it's also bad, because the visitor cannot see the history of the building. Any building you see today, from Roman times, from the Middle Ages, from the Renaissance, has passed through different periods. For construction, reconstruction, sometimes earthquakes, sometimes floods. All this remains in a building. So the archaeologists of buildings have the objective of reconstructing all these different histories, which we can still see on them. And this is something that, for example, art historians don't do.
No. That's why a couple of years ago, we had, at the American University of Rome, we had a visiting professor from China. And she came with us on a trip to L'Aquila to look at the reconstruction of the historic centre of L'Aquila. And we were walking up the streets into the centre. She was absolutely appalled. Couldn't believe it, because as we walked through these buildings, if you look inside, they are full up to the windows of rubble, because the building has collapsed inwards, right? So you look in and the rubble is up to the ceiling. And she said, I can't believe you're doing this. She said, they are like taped off, not allowed to go in. She said, you are leaving this rubble here. Why are you not, clearing out this building and, giving people a new home? She said, in China, we wouldn't do that. In China, we would have the bulldozers in. Within 2 weeks, these people would have a home to go back to. Here we are, some, 7 years after the earthquake in L'Aquila, and they're still not there. And so we said, well, the system here is that if you want to rebuild it as a historic building, you need to use the same material. So it is like that until they can get the funds and the money and the expertise to rebuild it. Now that is how we approach historic preservation. For the Chinese, it would be sufficient to bulldoze it away and put in something that looked the same, but was not built the same. Now, we can say that's not authentic for us. That's not what we want. She made a very valid argument, which, we need to consider when we're thinking about this. We can't just cling to our old ways of doing things. We have to justify them and say they're right. They're still right because, we thought about it and we still think they're right. And she said, well, okay, but you have deprived these people of a home. These people would, instead of living in these horrible, temporary homes, they could have been back in here and had a real home to go to. It's a valid argument. It's a valid thing to think about and to say, if you're going to say that we want to keep doing it like this, we've got to be able to answer that question of why it's still a good thing to do. We can't just ignore it. But, and the Venice Charter itself became very influential in the 1972 UNESCO Convention of, it's usually called the World Heritage Convention. This is its full title. but we call it the World Heritage Convention, and it led to the setting up of the World Heritage List in 1975. When that list was set up in 1975, all of the concepts and principles of the Venice Charter were incorporated into it. So that is how we were going to define monuments and buildings that went onto the World Heritage List. Now, you may be looking and you know, these are the 6 criteria which relate to cultural heritage, the other 4 relate to natural heritage. And you may look at that and you say, well, I don't know, I can't see authenticity in there anywhere. You know, and tell me why it's important, because it's not actually mentioned. If you look today at the criteria for the World Heritage List, they are almost identical, actually, to this original one. Very little has changed. They've changed the grammar a little bit, but, you know, it's just really the odd word here and there. And yet, the criteria are completely different. So, it's clear that these are not where the decision-making lies. And in order to understand that, you have to know that what really counts is not these criteria, but what are called the operating guidelines. The operating guidelines tell you how you're going to interpret this. And the operating guidelines are changed quite frequently, every few years in fact. I think they're now on their like 15th version or something like that. You know. So you need to go to the operating guidelines to look at exactly how things have changed. So this is how in the original operating guidelines in 1977, this is how authenticity was defined, and every nomination had to meet the criteria of authenticity. That had to meet this. And it was going to be defined in 4 ways: design, materials, workmanship, setting. For a monument to be authentic, it had to be authentic in these 4 criteria. So it had to look the same, it had to use the same materials, which is where our L'Aquila example comes in. That looked the same, but in China would have been made completely differently. It had to use the same workmanship skills. Again, China wouldn't pass that, because they would have done it mechanically instead of using craft skills. And setting. Setting means that you can't change the environment around, and in UNESCO terms, that usually refers to the buffer zone. So around a site there's also a buffer zone, and the buffer zone ensures that the environment you have is the same as the environment that was there before. That's what's going to determine whether your site gets on this list.
But in that way, Valerie, the UNESCO decides on quite the contrary of what people in Dresden, for example, have decided to do. Because they wanted everything as it was before, so they reconstructed completely. Mm-hmm. And then the UNESCO...
You mean Warsaw? Do you mean Warsaw, what people in Warsaw?
Yeah. So it's the contrary.
Well, let's see.
Okay.
This is how it came in first. This is a story that's got, it's got many episodes. So, in 1980, so a few years after this, people started to criticise this, in particular because of, in particular, Warsaw, but other places as well. Warsaw wanted to be, you know, they had suffered so much, they wanted this site to be on the World Heritage List. And so, they brought in a new operating guidelines, and they said, reconstruction is acceptable if it is carried out on the basis of complete and detailed speculation on the original and to no extent on conjecture. Now that was definitely for Warsaw. So Warsaw became inscribed. It was accepted on the basis that they had reconstructed it on the basis of plans. The same meeting rejected Carcassonne. Carcassonne was put forward and they were resoundingly rejected. In fact, if you want to amuse yourself, you could go and look at some of the documents on this. The people of Carcassonne were absolutely not amused at this decision. Absolutely not. They did not expect it, and they were pretty vitriolic in their, when they heard the news. Especially as, of course, the head of ECOMOS, who was the person who made the presentation, was himself French. So that added a certain element to it as well. Michel Perron argued that Viollet-le-Duc's restoration did not respect the history of the site. It was his own reconstruction in his head. However, for the people of Carcassonne, there's a happy ending to this story. Because 5 years later, they get inscribed. But rather ironically, not for being a medieval city. It is considered an excellent example of a medieval fortified town whose massive defences were constructed on walls dating from the late antiquity. It is of exceptional importance by virtue of the restoration work carried out by Viollet-le-Duc, which had a profound influence on subsequent developments. So they're actually saying this is not a great medieval town. What this is a brilliant example of 19th century conservation techniques. So it got accepted on that basis, which I think probably, well, it's better than not being accepted at all, but was probably not what they were looking for.
But it's fair, I think, because Carcassonne is famous because of the reconstruction. I mean, it would have not been fair because it's one of the most important, let's say, medieval reconstructions. I mean, everybody knows it because of Viollet-le-Duc. So it has value.
I have to tell you, I have given this lecture before to other places and pointed this out. And I've had more than one person tell me that I've ruined Carcassonne for them because they genuinely thought it was medieval. And that, you know, and then one woman told me, she said, you have just ruined my entire last summer's experience. We went to Carcassonne, really, very sorry. You know, so I understand, but for many people, this was a disappointment. I think this comes back to your point of the aura. There's no aura there now, because it was there. It was medieval. They can't imagine themselves, you know, wandering around in medieval dress and, you know, got to, I don't think there's any doubt that the people of Carcassonne are not pleased about it.
They should know more about their past.
Yeah.
The problem is ignorance.
Also, I think that this hasn't changed because, as you said, the aura of Carcassonne is still medieval. So, yes, this inscription was based on something else, but people from Carcassonne are providing the tourists and the visitors the experience they want, which is the medieval.
Ah, very good. Let's come back to that at the end, because that is very true. They're giving the visitor what they want. That's right. That's the 21st century experience. Giving them what they want. Okay. So, this is where we are in the 1980s. Right? There have been some changes through time. Initially, the World Heritage List seemed to be such, you know, such a massive step forward in many ways. And in many ways it is still, even though I'm sure you know there's lots of criticism of it. But in essence, the criticism revolves around the fact that it's become so successful. I mean, I don't think anybody imagined it would be this successful, that everybody would be so interested in it. But when they started to look at it, they started to see that there's an incredible bias within this. Because even today, Italy still has more sites on the World Heritage List than the whole of Africa put together. There is this incredible world bias. I urge you to go to the UNESCO World Heritage Centre site and look on the geography map of where the sites are. And you can see from what we've done so far why this would be. All of the criteria are based on Western principles. They're really based on Ruskin. And if you come from other cultures, you are unlikely to meet the criteria which would even allow you to be nominated. You know, there is a very great difference between, as I said, our Chinese colleague, who is a professor teaching, it has to be remembered, cultural heritage at a Chinese university, could not understand our definition of authenticity. It did not ring any bells with her at all. You know, she could not understand it at all. I have to say, by the time she left, she did, and she was extremely complimentary to us for revealing it to her. She didn't necessarily agree with it, but she did understand it. And that is true in other places as well. Our criteria they're just irrelevant to them. It's just not how they view their culture. So, in 1994, the Nara conference in Nara in Japan was set up specifically to address this, to give a better define authenticity and to give a new dynamic to the World Heritage Convention to make it more relevant to the diversity of other cultures. So we take, for example, the Ise Shrine in Japan, which was established 4 BC. But it is, however, rebuilt every 20 years, regardless of whether it needs it or not. Because this is part of the Shinto belief in death and the need to renew everything. And to understand the impermanence of all things. That is a fundamental part of the belief system. So, you know, clearly this is not going to fit all the criteria that we have about authenticity. So the Nara document was published, and I just took out one article which best sums it up. It says, all judgments about values may differ from culture to culture and even within culture. So heritage properties must be considered and judged within the cultural context to which they belong. So they're saying, okay, you can have a concept of authenticity, but it's got to be culturally specific. It's got to relate to that culture. Now, you might think that as this is now 25 years old, that the situation would be better, but actually if you look at UNESCO World Heritage List, progress has been, you know, glacially slow on getting this recognised in practice. And it is still the case that the Ruskin principles are very embedded. It is not, it's like, as they say, turning around an oil tanker. When you have an organisation as big as UNESCO and as embedded, making them suddenly change ideas is not going to be very easy. And although it is changing, things are changing, you might think that after 25 years there would have been more progress than there has been. So, we come on to authenticity to us today. What does it mean in the 21st century? I said to you at the beginning of this presentation that, you know, if we were having this discussion 10 years ago, it would be very different. You know, we are different now. But a lot of our regulations, a lot of the heritage we have is based on these older ideas. And we have to like re-examine it and say, do they still have validity for us today? We can't just keep doing it because we did it in the past. That's not a good reason for doing it. That doesn't mean to say that they were wrong, or that, just that we are different as a society and we have to be relevant to the society we're in. You know, I mean, I spent my whole life studying the past and studying history. And one thing I've learned about it is you can't live in it. You know, I make a living from it, but you can't live in it. We are living now, 2019. What we do, it has to be valid today and for future generations, and you know, that's where we are. So what has changed in the 21st century? First of all, the importance of acknowledging living heritage. That is the people. And that is most embodied in the UNESCO Convention for Intangible Cultural Heritage. It was rather unfortunate, I would say, that we've ended up in a situation where we see these as two separate things. Tangible heritage, historic buildings connected with the past. Intangible heritage, customs connected with people today. In reality, they are all part of the same thing. You know, if you're going to have historic buildings, like this is a historic building, yeah, we have to live in it, we have to use it. It has to have things for PowerPoint projectors. It has to have bathrooms that, you know, come up to our standards. These things have to be part, but there are aspects of this building that we really do not want to get rid of. We don't want to just wipe away. We think they're important to the building. So we have to see these things as being together, and that is true of anyway. We can't turn our historic cities into museums. They have to be cities, and cities have to have people to make them work.
The problem is who decides what to erase and what to keep.
That's right, it is the key question. And that, I think, is one that we, I think you've put your finger on what, to me, is the weakest point of the current educational system, is that we're not well equipped to make decisions. And that, I would say, is particularly true of Italy, which has this law that says that everything is, you know, everything is to be kept. Well, we are now, what are we, 7 billion people on this planet, and we will fairly soon, within your lifetime, possibly even within mine, the way things are going, be 9 billion people. We are now living in cities. More than 50% of the population lives in cities, and that's increasing dramatically. It's clear that we cannot never use a place that's been used before. I mean, that's just the reality of it. As we are growing, we cannot say, somebody built something here before, we're not going to be able to use this spot. So we have to start making choices. Choices about what we're going to keep and what we're going to let go. And that is going to be a difficult one to do. But if we don't grasp that, that concept, that idea, if we don't say, okay, this is going to be a problem, and you know what? We are going to be involved in making this decision. If we don't do it, I think we won't like the outcome. Because the kind of people who will make the decision will probably not be people who embody any of our values. But we have to get involved. We're going to have to get our hands dirty, as you say. You know, we're not going to be able to stay out of this on some elevated academic plane that doesn't get involved in this. We're going to have to get in there and fight.
And it's something we have to do now, because the general idea when we heard about what are we going to do in heritage, and I see practically every week in meetings with other professors and so on, we have to keep heritage for the future. Yeah, but the future will not be there, and as you say, the people in the future will probably don't have an interest on maintaining what we are keeping and keeping and keeping and keeping, and it's so expensive.
Well, we've got to show them why they should have.
Exactly. So we have to think now what we are going to do and teach future
We have to fight for
generations.
what we think is of value and importance. To do that, we have to first define it, which is more difficult. But the first step in this was recognising that a living heritage is important. And this, sorry, I'll just put this in because I love this picture. It's the first element inscribed as intangible cultural heritage, which is the main square in Marrakesh. And it's the whole square, because within this square they carry out all of the aspects of their traditional culture. The buying, the selling, the performing is all carried out in this one square.
So in Padova, for example, we did not very wide, Sonia will probably repeat it in future, but we made a questionnaire on the people in the city, what was the monument they appreciate the most, what is the monument they feel represents the identity of the city, and let's say surprisingly or not, they didn't say Cappella degli Stroveni, or they didn't say Sant'Antonio, or whatever, they say the market, the market building, and when we asked them why, they all answer because it's a living building, and because we live there and we go there and we do everything there. So it's important also for, let's say, common people, not just for the UNESCO, that the buildings and the heritage are part of their lives, not just something.
That's exactly right. It's got to be living. Even our historic buildings have got to have a connection with today's population in some way, and we've got to help foster that. I just put this in because I love this picture. Anybody wants to have a go afterwards, very happy to provide the scissors for you. It challenged the system because intangible, who's going to be the expert on the Peruvian scissor dance? Well, it can't be someone from ICOMOS, it can't be someone from, UNESCO office in Paris. I mean, who's going to, it's the people who are going to tell you, is that a valid dance or is it not? So this convention did more than just allow protection for dance and things. It actually questioned structure, because it said, do you know what, ordinary people actually can tell you this as well. You don't have to have a PhD in architectural history to, an ordinary person can also tell you this. So it questioned who is to judge and what is authentic and who owns it. Who actually owns this? Big questions. So as they say, we ended up with this, what I think is an unfortunate divide between tangible and intangible heritage. And the intangible heritage started off as a very junior partner. It was something that was not considered to be as important as tangible heritage, but as time has gone on, it has become more important, and people are beginning to see its relevance. And it's phenomenally popular. There are so many elements waiting to be inscribed on UNESCO. People love it. They just love it. The idea of their dance, of their food, of their dress being inscribed. So it's already got almost 50% of the inscriptions that tangible heritage has in only a decade. And tangible heritage has been going for 40 years. So it's already, you know, it's going at a massive rate. There's an Australian theorist, archaeological theorist called Laura Jane Smith, and I don't know if you've come across her work, yeah? Okay, I'm going to be mentioning her tomorrow as well. She has pointed out that actually this is a completely illogical distinction, and in fact all heritage is intangible heritage, because even if you've got a building, it only has meaning because of what that building means to you. So if you've got, for example, a church, right, a medieval church, well, without the belief system that underpins that building, all you've actually got is a load of building material. You haven't got anything at all. So she says this is a completely illogical definition. And the idea that intangible heritage is less important is also totally illogical, because actually all heritage is intangible. All heritage has value because of the intangible elements attached to the tangible, because without those you wouldn't be interested in it in any case. So that kind of like turns everything on its head, looking at it like that. And then the next theorist I want to bring in to our discussion of how we look at heritage today and authenticity in the visitor experience is Sophia Lavardi. Do you come across her? Okay, she's new, so let me start with who she is. She is French, but teaches in Britain at the University of Kent. And she wrote what has become a very influential book on what's called, it's got a long title, but it's something like UNESCO and the concept of outstanding universal value. Outstanding universal value, usually abbreviated to OUV, is something which underpins all the criteria of choosing a site for UNESCO inscription. What you're saying is that this cathedral or this prehistoric site, whatever, it has a value which is first of all outstanding, so it's above normal, and in some way it belongs to us all. It's universal. This was an absolutely terrible thing to put in the initial thing because it's almost impossible to define, you know. And it also sets up a contradiction because in reality it is important to a group. These things are always culturally specific, so, and the fact that they are so isn't a problem, shouldn't be a problem for us, you know. So it's a dreadful thing to have in, but now we're stuck with it. We can't get rid of it, we're stuck with it, so we have to deal with it. And within this concept of looking at outstanding universal value, she came up with what she calls post-authenticity. And this links back in a way to the intangible element. She says that we need to understand that what is authentic is not intrinsic in the object. It is extrinsic to the object. It is intrinsic to us. It's inside of us. It's in our heads. Right? So we look at something and we think, oh, that's authentic. I like that, that's authentic. And we think that because it corresponds with what we've been taught to think is the right way things should be. So it's got nothing to do with the object itself. about us. And if we're examining authenticity, we need to examine ourselves first and foremost. So, she says, authenticity is not fixed, it's negotiated between the person and the object. It's a negotiation you enter into. And she says, I use the term post to refer, first of all, to the move away from the 4 degrees of authenticity in design, material, workmanship, setting, which were initially intended to be applied universally and indiscriminately. But we now know that they don't apply to a lot of the world. Such a term helps to criticise this rational and universalist framework. Post-authenticity represents a move away from these Enlightenment values and legacy. And the term post refers to postmodern evolution. In the same way as you have modern thinking and postmodern thinking, she's put post into authenticity and said, instead of thinking that this is one set of fixed values which belongs to an object, you need to understand that this is a set of culturally relative values which will go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and it's inside your head, essentially. And I put up some examples, practical examples of what she means. And this is an example of authenticity is personal and all heritage is intangible. So tell me what you see there.
I know already.
Yes, so you keep quiet. What are we looking at here? Sorry? Okay, we're looking at a man looking out the window. Can we identify the man?
Do you know who he is?
Who do you think he is?
Somebody knows who he is?
How short-lived fame is. What do you think? So you know, I can tell you. Yeah, of course. Well done, Barack Obama. This is Barack Obama looking out of a window. What is this room, do you think? Prison. Where do you think it is?
Because it's bars and it's small.
That's
it
right.
has type of bed and it
has to be
reduced, let's say.
Why would he be looking out of a prison window?
Maybe it's Alcatraz or something like that.
Something like that. Something much more relevant to who he is and what he
he's from
represents.
Illinois or something. No, he's from I can't remember where is he from.
Hawaii, but it doesn't.
Yeah, that's not it. Yeah. Why do you think? What does Obama represent?
The liberty of the citizen.
Yeah. What was he the first one?
Black
First black president. Where do you think this might be? Where might this be?
Yeah. Black president.
Oh, stop helping them! Stop helping them! Well done. This is Robben Island. This is Nelson Mandela's South in Robben Island. Right? Now, if you didn't know who Barack Obama was, if you didn't know who Nelson Mandela was, if you didn't know where this is, this has absolutely no meaning at all. Right? The meaning, the authenticity, is entirely in knowing the information around it. This is not heritage until you have that negotiation between the viewer and the place, in order for the viewer to see it as heritage, to see it as important. You have to know that. And you have to know everything around it. You have to know the situation with apartheid in South Africa, what Nelson Mandela represented to them, the civil rights issues in the United States, what Barack Obama represented. And then this photograph has huge meaning when you know that. It deserves to be a heritage site for what it represents. We have someone who comes to give us lectures sometimes in Rome from, I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but the Zulu University in South Africa, and she's done a specific study on the visitors to this site. And she has come up with the most extraordinary emotion that this evokes, this sound. So much so, actually, you can only see it, unless you're Barack Obama, you can only see it for something like 1 minute. Such is the press of people who want to see it. And because you have to go out on the boat to it and back, and so she interviewed people on the boat out, and specifically the boat back. And people are in tears, they're crying, they're so moved by this. And that is white people as well as black people. In fact, interestingly, she found no difference between the impact on white people. It was all the same. They were all profoundly moved by it. But you couldn't be unless you knew what is in essence the intangible heritage associated with it. That is what gives it meaning. And I have a second example of post-authenticity. Right, I'm sure most of us even now are brought up to think that the image on the left is how we should see the Emperor Augustus. In fact, all our recent research tells us that this statue looked like the one on the right, which to most people is horribly garish and is the absolute epitome of a fake thing that should not, it did not look like that. But actually it did look like that. And the reason why we don't like it so much, or maybe some people do, but why a lot of people don't like it so much, is because we've been brought up to think that the one on the left is how it should look. How it should look. And all of our values are there, but that's inside of us. It's not intrinsic to the object. Is this authentic? This is what's called the Helia. It's held in the last week of January in the Shetland Islands, in which they celebrate their Viking heritage. The Shetland Islands off the north of Scotland were in fact until the 15th century they were a part of Norway. And so they have a very different history to the rest of Scotland. They actually have quite an antagonistic history with the mainland of Scotland. They have their own language, their own very distinctive accent, and they like to celebrate it. Is this authentic? Well, not in the sense of a continuous tradition. This was deliberately resurrected in the 19th century to sort of help, enliven a really long winter evening. In January, you can all get together and celebrate and get drunk and burn boats, and it's all a lot of fun. To do that, it's got a huge promotion now because in the dark winter evenings it brings lots of tourists to Shetland in January when otherwise they wouldn't go. So everyone loves it. Do they like it? Absolutely they do. Is it their identity? Yes it is. They're very keen to tell everyone that they are not the same as other Scots. They have this other heritage. They want it to be remembered. It's authentic for them. This is Stonehenge. Stonehenge is very important. You probably know, a megalithic site in southern England. Very important scientifically. Lots of other people want it. And it's positioned because it's important for a solstice, for movements of the sun. Other people like to go and celebrate that. In the 1980s, the police forcibly evicted them. It was really horrible, actually. If you go on YouTube, you can see police assaults on these people, with batons, hitting them, arresting them in a very, very brutal fashion, you know, really for no reason at all. We do now have a slightly more enlightened viewpoint, and so in 2017, by this time we actually, you know, encourage people to come and enjoy Stonehenge in this way. It is a different way to enjoy it. If you know they're coming, you can plan for the police, you can bring in portable toilets and things. You know, you can actually make it a nice experience. You don't have to beat them to death over it.
However, sorry, can I ask you something? I wonder if it's what kind of experience you're giving with so many people. I mean, I was in Stonehenge and I couldn't go inside, and so I was really upset about it because I couldn't feel really, I felt excluded from the site. But also there were few people with me, so it was okay. I wonder with millions of people, what kind of experience you can have.
Well, that's, you can't control everything.
Yeah.
You know, the alternative is to say you can come but you can't. The solstice, it's open to everyone to go. They do open up the interior. You can actually go inside, but there's a specific moment of the day between 8 and 9. You have to book it. I do. Yeah. That was how they decided. When they built the new visitor centre, they decided to divide up Stonehenge and say, neo-pagans can have it on these days for their ritual ceremony, only they can go on those days. The general public go in this period of time. Archaeologists who want to study it scientifically can go at this period of the time, and then on other moments, they're going to open it up to everyone. And if millions of people turn up, well, millions of people turn up. That's, you know, that's how they're going to deal with it. It's not perfect, but it is making it available to everyone. You're not going to be able to control everyone, you know, that's...
No, but yeah, sometimes it can really ruin your experience of the site.
You can go on that day, maybe.
But yeah, but there are some sites that, I mean, every day is like that.
Well, that's right. So Angkor Wat is one, in fact. That's when you've got to make management decisions. And they are not going to be easy, and they are never going to be perfect.
It's like in Venice.
Yes.
These are the tough decisions that need to be made. And they're not going to be resolved with platitudes or with easy solutions. No. Yeah, just to show you how beautiful the solstice is, and that's why these people go. When they go, they get it all to themselves, because that's, you know, that's their allotted time to do that. They claim continuity with the Druids, which is not true. This was reinvented in the 19th century, but that's fine.
I think that for a person that's going through this kind of manifestation or rituals, they don't care if there are a lot of people. It's like you want to see Jimi Hendrix and go to Woodstock. You don't care if there are millions of people here. I think the experience for these people are to go there, make what they believe, and with other people they don't care.
All together.
It's different, yes, it's different from go to visit the site. It's a different perception, I think.
Experience.
Yeah, it's experiential. This is a site in York, a Viking site. Coppergate it was originally called. When we dug it, I dug on it in fact as a student. And they decided to turn it into a visitor centre where they reconstructed the buildings. And you go round in a little sort of cart. And then they have these reenactors who dress up as Vikings. Well, I say dress up as Vikings, they don't actually, because they literally are Vikings. I mean, they are, thank goodness they found this job, because they are the kind of people who like to have a different personality. They know, honestly, they know everything you would ever want to know or not want to know about Viking history. They know about the shoes, the clothes, everything. They are incredibly well versed in it, and they give people a different experience. It's run by York Archaeological Trust. It's a serious archaeological, but it engages people in a different way. And then this, you may know, Star Wars. He took over Skellig Michael. And there's a big discussion. The archaeologists, Skellig Michael is an early medieval Irish monastery, and the archaeologists there don't really like the fact that Disney is now in charge of this site, because it's an important Star Wars site. But can you use that to engage people in the same way as video games engage people? And this is now where we are, the power of mass media. Most people's initial introduction to history in the past is through a screen, right? And they have seen, and this is where we come back to Viollet-le-Duc and Ruskin. They are the Viollet-le-Duc branch. You know, this is the 21st century. This is the 21st century version of Viollet-le-Duc. You know, how you can make this into a whole world for yourself. It's particularly true of medieval sites. And it's sometimes been called what's called the prosthetic memory, meaning that a lot of people who go to visit these sites, they actually identify very, very closely with these sites. They feel they're part of their own history. They have sewn it into their own life story. And you should not underestimate the numbers that are involved here. They have the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, which is where they film some of Game of Thrones. They literally do not know what to do with these visitors. They have hundreds of coachloads of people coming to see this site who want this experience. They've been, you know, this for them is what they want. I come from Cornwall in southwest of England, and we have a similar site in Tadgell, which is a medieval site which was allegedly King Arthur's site. It is also used in the Game of Thrones, and I just couldn't believe it when I went there last summer with my family, because we've always been there, and normally, you know, previous years we could go and be the only people there. You know, oh my goodness, I had to queue 45 minutes to get in to this site. The wait for the bus back up was an hour. And you could hear people in the line and people going round. They actually weren't terribly interested in the phasing of the site. They were projecting their own kind of memories and their own stories onto this incredibly evocative site. Now, we can say, well, they're not proper visitors, or maybe, you know, we don't want them, but we can't actually. They are our audience, they are our public. And whether we kind of like them or not, or agree with it or not, we have to deal with them. We have to accept their realities, and we have to find a way that we're going to deal with them. I mean, I personally get a little bit irritated with people like neo-pagans and things. I really just can't relate to it at all. But I know that I have no right to impose that on them. If they want to come and do this site in that way, that is their right to do so. And it is my job to enable them to do so. And whether I believe in it or not has got nothing to do with it, really. It's completely irrelevant to any discussion. You know, people have a right to enjoy these sites in this way. And they are going to enjoy them like this. And if it hasn't happened already, in a short length of time, these kinds of visitors will be the majority of the people that you'll be dealing with. So you're going to have to, like, engage in their world. and it can either be a problem for us, or we can try and embrace it in some way. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Most of the things she said, and the bibliography, just not Lavadi, all the other ones, we have everything in our library. Remember, we buy everything on this subject, so you can pick them. As I was the first time, I'm always impressed by your presentations, because they make me think a lot about how can we profit from this experience or from these things. You have to understand, all of you, that all these things are the things that are right now being discussed on high, let's say, levels of heritage discussions. I mean, most of these things in other places will be considered, I wouldn't say absurd, but maybe most of you are also shocked by this kind of things. But I think it's the way we should think for the future, and most of them knew that you have to pick a job in the future, just thinking about all the possibilities that these things can give us for the future.
I mean, there are very real things you're going to have to face here. The issues you raised of, are all these people going to destroy your site? Well, that's a real thing that needs to be considered. You know, not all sites can take thousands of people travelling over it. But another very real thing to be considered is that public funding for all heritage is being cut back. You know, you're going to have to find money, and this level of interest should not be ignored.
It's also very important, you will see it this year, when you work with local communities. Maybe it's not so exaggerated, but local communities, normal people, has other ways of being and seeing the past. And sometimes in some schools, for example, they ask us to study things that we haven't even considered, because for them heritage is something different and they really want to live experience. So it's something that if we're going to work in the future more and more with people, we have to assume that it's not always what we think is heritage, that it's important and relevant for them. I want to know, is there any question you want to ask? We can also do as we did last week. We think about maybe a bit on the questions, and she's going to be here again tomorrow, so we can maybe
start
making questions or make a bit longer discussion. Is it okay for you? Okay, so
I'm kind of interested, though today you said some people will be shocked. But I mean, was anybody shocked?
I can tell you, Sonia is doing her PhD on perception of heritage in Padova and in other places, and she discovered, for example, that for young generations, one of the main buildings in Padova that took, when we asked them what is heritage, young students or the schools, for them heritage is something I didn't even know that existed, which is right now an abandoned kind of park place near Prato della Valle, which is the Stadio Appiani. The Stadio Appiani is an old football place where a famous football player of Padova had played, and he died in the First World War. When I say this to my students, they're shocked. And I ask them, for you, is this heritage? And generally they say no. But
when we did a community project in the autumn, and in Casalino, which is a very poor area to the south of Rome, and it's got a lot of immigrants in it. It's also got a refugee centre, which was the focus of us. And it's got a kind of old Roman working class population there as well. So it's got, I mean, it's very high density. It's got a lot of old apartment blocks that are not in good shape. And we did a great project down there with them. In this area, they have the most amazing aqueduct on 2 levels that goes across a valley. It's really stunning. They've got the best painted catacombs that there are in existence. If you go to any art history book, they will have those pictures in because they are stunning. So they've got superb Roman villas there. So we wanted to know, we did a survey and asked, what do you like? What heritage monument do you like? The one they liked was the historic tram that went through the area. And the tram, I may say, is historic, not because of some heritage thing, it's because the City Council cares so very little about these people that it has never bothered to update it. So the tram line is 100 years old, and the actual rolling stock of trams are like 50, 60 years old. They're the old yellow ones, they break down the whole time. And the City Council doesn't want to spend any money on this area, so they still have this. They love the tram. The tram is there, they said, you know, I met my wife on the tram. Says, the tram gets me out in the evenings. The tram, they loved it. It was like a moving social centre, this tram, because it goes through the whole area and you always meet people you know on the tram.
I think this is one of our responsibilities. We cannot do anything about it, but we can improve the knowledge of politicians on what the people in certain areas want to preserve or wants to improve.
Well, in fact, the City Council keep wanting to get rid of it, and they've formed a protest group to keep it, because they want it, they like it, so they don't care if they modernise it, not interested. You know, it's the lifeline of their community. It was fantastic. They were, you know, they just loved it, and they loved that we made it the centre of our exhibition. They just loved that. Now, if we hadn't gone and asked them, if we'd have just told them that the monuments we're going to focus on are going to be the catacombs and the aqueduct and things, we would have lost them altogether. They wouldn't have been interested. You know, so.
Then maybe you can start with the tram to get together, to have their, let's say, support, and then go to the others. But if we do our project without asking people what they are interested on, what they want, what they feel, and so on, we are going to be always somebody from outside. And so we won't be able to develop our
project. They will always surprise you, I think. Always surprise you. You learn so much. But I just learned so much in this community. So it's always worth doing. And that's got to be your own flexibility in starting from their perspective, and then sort of saying, you know, there are other, we can help you expand this, we can help you enrich this, we can assist you.